You ever get that feeling, that sense of dread when you look at the future? The feeling that the systems we all count on are, well, breaking down, and it maybe none of it really means anything? If you have, you are definitely not alone. That feeling, it actually has a name and a really deep philosophical history. So today, we're going to trace this modern age of anxiety all the way back to the one philosopher who basically saw it all coming.
For a lot of young people right now, the future doesn't exactly feel like this great, shiny thing full of promise. It feels murky, unstable, and the word that keeps popping up to describe this whole vibe is nihilism. It's like it's become the default philosophy for a generation staring into the unknown. And the numbers, they really paint a grim picture. A recent study found that a staggering 1 in 4 young people feel like they will never emotionally recover from the pandemic. Their overall happiness has hit the lowest level ever recorded. And look, this isn't just about being in a bad mood. It's a deep, profound sense of disillusionment, this feeling that the very ground under your feet isn't solid anymore. And honestly, when you look at the world they're supposed to inherit, can you really blame them? I mean, it's just this constant flood of existential threats. You've got terrifying climate reports, politics that are more divided than ever, and wealth inequality that's just spiraling. On top of all that, fundamental rights are being challenged, and there's this constant background noise of potential war. How is anyone supposed to believe in this system when it feels like the system itself is the source of all the anxiety?
Okay, so we've put a name to this feeling, nihilism. But what does that word really mean? It gets thrown around all the time, and a lot of times people get it wrong. If we really want to understand what's going on in our culture, we've got to get clear on what we're talking about. We need to define the void. So, at its absolute core, nihilism is the belief that life has no built-in meaning, zero. It's the idea that there are no universal moral truths. So, from a nihilist's point of view, things like good and evil, they aren't real cosmic facts. They're just man-made constructions, rules we made up along the way to try and make sense of everything. And it's super important to separate nihilism from a couple of its close cousins. It's not the same as pessimism. A pessimist still believes things have value, they just think the outcome is going to be negative. And it's not apathy, which is just not caring. A nihilist might actually care a whole lot, they just believe that in the end there's nothing real or meaningful to care about. See the difference?
Now, this feeling of a world without meaning, it is not new. In fact, one philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, pretty much made his name by diagnosing this exact condition over 100 years ago. And he wasn't celebrating it, not at all. He was sounding a massive alarm about what he saw on the horizon. This right here is one of the most famous and most misunderstood quotes in all of philosophy. When Nietzsche said God is dead, he wasn't just fist-pumping for atheism. For him, it was a terrifying diagnosis. It meant that the entire foundation, the moral and religious framework that had given Western civilization its meaning for 2,000 years, had crumbled. We had killed the source of our own values. And Nietzsche's big question was, what in the world do we do now? How do we comfort ourselves? Nietzsche saw this whole thing as a long, slow, historical process. It starts way back with Socratic philosophy, questioning everything. That leads to Plato and Christianity, who create this two-world system. You've got our flawed world down here and a perfect, true world up there. But here's the kicker. That same system also preached that truth was the highest value. And eventually, that will to truth, through science, through rigorous thinking, turned on itself and proved that the true world was a fabrication. In this moment of beautiful, tragic irony, the West's greatest virtue, its commitment to honesty, ended up destroying its own foundation, and all that's left is a void. So with that foundation totally gone, Nietzsche predicted that humanity would come to a massive fork in the road. He saw two completely different paths leading out from the abyss of nihilism, two possible futures for a world that no longer had a god to give it meaning. He saw two ways this could go. The first is what he called passive nihilism. This is the path of the last man. He looks at the meaninglessness of it all, shrugs, and just gives up. All he wants is comfort and security. But then there's active nihilism, which Nietzsche symbolized with a lion. This is a nihilism of strength. It doesn't just sigh and give up, it roars. It actively destroys the old, dead values to clear the ground for something new to grow. You might think the destructive lion is the real threat, but for Nietzsche, the ultimate danger was the last man. Why? Because the last man represents humanity giving up on greatness. It's a future filled with people who are just content with their tiny comforts, with no real ambition, no striving.
You can almost see him describing a world of endless scrolling and cheap dopamine hits, a world where any real struggle is avoided. A planet full of lost men, Nietzsche worried, would make us sick of being human. But here's the thing. Nietzsche didn't just leave us in despair. He argued that the collapse of all the old values wasn't just a disaster, it was also a terrifying but exhilarating opportunity. See, the challenge wasn't to go out and find some new meaning hidden under a rock. The challenge was to create it ourselves. He laid out this incredible journey of the spirit in 3 stages. First, he said, the spirit is like a camel. It kneels down and takes on the heaviest weights: tradition, duty, all the thou shalts. But to become free, the spirit must transform into a lion, fighting that great dragon of tradition to win its own freedom. But destruction isn't the end goal. Finally, the lion has to become a child. The child is a new beginning, a fresh start. It doesn't follow rules or destroy them. It joyfully creates its own world, saying a sacred yes to life itself. So this is the big takeaway. For Nietzsche, this crisis of nihilism is the ultimate test for humankind. Now that the old guardrails are gone, we are finally truly free. And that means we're challenged to become our own meaning makers. This is the profound task facing the generation that's inheriting all that anxiety we talked about at the beginning, the task of transforming from creatures who search for meaning into creators of meaning. And all of this leaves us with the most important question there is, a question that echoes from Nietzsche's time right into our own headphones today. If the old foundations have crumbled, if the old maps are totally useless, it's up to us to draw new ones. So, what do we put at the center of that new map? What is actually worth valuing now?